Today is part 3 of a 3-part series on subdivision development. Developing subdivisions is a complex undertaking that requires both a vision of what's possible and an eye for detail throughout the entire process. In the final 1-hour session, participants will learn how to evaluate, hire, and oversee the site development contractor, work with local governing bodies, understand liability as well as bonding and insurance requirements, start construction on finished lots, and when appropriate, develop a homeowners association. Thank you to USDA Rural Development and the Rural Capacity Development Initiative for sponsoring today's event. Today's speaker is Earl Pfeiffer. Earl served as the Executive Director of Florida Home Partnership from 1997 until his retirement in 2018. He has a vision that each home should be built not to look like affordable housing, but indistinguishable from market rate homes. Earl's background is in paraprofessional engineering, having worked as a field manager for several large civil projects, including subdivision development, water and wastewater treatment plants. He's a third-generation home builder and has worked over 35 years in the construction industry. Earl's involved in community development, planning, and management, and he's developed 10 subdivisions with a total of 1,000 plus lots, in addition to an 80-unit townhouse development in Plant City. Earl serves on the National Rural Housing Coalition Board and has served as Vice President of the National Rural Self-Help Housing Association. He also works as a consultant for the Housing Assistance Council, and he owns and operates Colorado Mountain Land Office, a real estate brokerage in Colorado. Now I'd like to hand the webinar over to today's speaker, Earl Pfeiffer.
Thank you and good morning. I'm not sure if we're on here, but I believe so.
You are good to go, Earl.
Okay.
If you want to take control of the presentation.
Yes, I certainly do. Thank you. Okay, good morning. Welcome to all of you. We have almost 50 people here, so I'm glad to see we have a broad participation today. This is the third in a session of 3 webinars on subdivision development. We are going to be today discussing the nuts and bolts of subdivision development, acquisition through completion. I've been doing this a long time. I've got over 40 years of civil experience and developed well over 1,000 lots. So I'm excited to share my expertise and knowledge with all of you today, and look forward to a good final session. As we discussed previously, there are 2 different types of subdivision development. One is private development, where all the infrastructure, streets, water, sewer, sidewalks, all of that is built to a private developer standard and then maintained by the Property Owners Association. The other option is a public system where the streets, water, sewer, utilities, sidewalks, rights of way are all dedicated by the developer to the governing jurisdiction to have them operated and maintained. And we're going to work forward today utilizing the public system. There are a lot of values to the private system, but it doesn't really work well for affordable housing for low-income families because the maintenance and operation of those improvements are left up to a governing board of homeowners, and so therefore we like to, and the expenses that tied into that maintenance as well is on the homeowner, so we like to have publicly dedicated utilities and streets. If there are further questions about the division between the 2, we can certainly address those as we are in the question and answer session this afternoon. 2 different types of development. We have a complex development, which is basically what you're seeing here, where you have to dig in retention ponds, streets, sidewalks, utilities, and all of that, or a simple development, which basically is what's illustrated in this next slide. The slides down, the lots on the bottom, the tan colored lots, that would be my example of a simple development, while Bayou Pass itself was a complex development. Once we put the infrastructure and streets in, the farmer next door came to us and asked us if we wanted to buy these 17 lots that were subdivided. And so that's a real simple process. So that's the simple. Everything else is pretty much considered as a complex development. And if you get the chance to do the simple developments, uh, always lean in that favor because it's fast and it's cost effective. So if your board's decided that you want to build a subdivision, we're on the road here. And in our last session, we talked about developing the concept for the development, the inception for it, all the due diligence, and bringing us to the point of being able to close and purchase on the lot. So at this point, we'll make an assumption that we now own the lot or we're about ready to purchase it, and we're going to get into the final phase of the engineering, design, and construction process. So currently, where we are today in this session is we have selected a parcel. Our entitlements, meaning planning and zoning, water, sewer, utilities, everything has been completed. That means that when we finish development, we will have access to utilities. We have made a preliminary layout and gotten that approved in the zoning process. We've studied traffic, explored site conditions, done surveying. So we're well on our way. Estimated some of the project costs, which is an ongoing moving target. And then we've hired our engineering firm and have that in place. And please just keep in mind that depending on the project, the steps that we take can vary from development to development. This is just one track I followed, but your development could take a separate track or a different track depending on the site conditions and everything that's needed. Before I carry on, I had two comments I wanted to make. I am today coming to you live from the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. I am on Starlink satellite internet, which is the real deal for rural America here. If I happen to freeze up, please just be patient for a minute or two, and I will eventually get back to you. Sometimes we have a little freeze up. And I am going to mute myself to give myself a little, not mute myself, go off camera to give myself a little extra bandwidth and capacity. And then lastly, I wanted to just make a call out and thank Vanessa Josie for her work in helping me prepare all the slides for this presentation. So just a review, we talked about this before. What are the responsibilities of the developer? Number one responsibility is buy the land, acquire, and develop the site. Assure availability, assure delivery of buildable lots to your specifications. Keep your new community maintained throughout the entire process and through all the sales. And you may want to establish an HOA in the process, and we'll talk more about that as we go on. As you are the developer, you're responsible for making sure the site is safe. You have a big, huge construction project with open trenches, open holes, open pits, heavy equipment, machinery, materials, supplies. So it's your job to make sure that the site is safe to all who enter it. And then we always want to continue marketing to the end buyers as part of our program. Just continue that motivation and outreach going forward. So the land development specifications, this is your chance now as you're filing up on this development to get with your engineer and talk about exactly what you need in the way of lots. By now we've got a preliminary site plan, so we pretty much have our lot widths determined, the dimensions of the lot. As I mentioned before, my favorite size lot to build with as an affordable builder is a 50 by 100 building lot. Depending on the setbacks, either 5 feet on each side or 7 feet on each side, you can get a 35 or 40-foot wide product on there. Still has plenty of room in the street for 2 cars to park in front of the home if necessary, and it provides a little bit more room than maybe a 35 or 40-foot lot would. And then when you're working with your engineer, you want to design your lots for the proper drainage, grading. Here are examples here of a type A, a type B, and a type C. A type A lot is the most common. Basically, everything drains from the back of the lot to the street. the street storm sewers, curb and gutter, take the water away from the property into a drain, an inlet, and then into the retention area. A type B drains to the back from the rear of the house and then drains to the street from the front of the house, and then a type C from the sidewalk on back drains to the rear of home. And that's really important. Some land developers in construction, when they build a subdivision, they like to tabletop the land. In other words, that means if your building elevation is 10 feet, then basically that's where they're going to set the grade. They're not tapering the land to give you a rough outline of how the finished product should work. And what happens if you tabletop, you end up bringing in extra fill dirt, which costs more money in the development process. And then when you're getting ready to build your home, you've got to do your grading and fine grading. Then you've got to haul that dirt away again. So you're paying to bring it in and you're paying to haul it out. So it's really, really critical that you sit with your engineer and perhaps your contractor, somebody that knows about your foundations, and talk about the type of drainage, talk about how you want the lots graded. In an ideal world, you'd have a front elevation and a rear elevation, and they would basically try to get the grading as close as they can to what your original, what your final product will look like. So now that we're owning the property, we've made a decision that we're going to move forward. So we've had our engineer doing some preliminary work to help us get through the zoning. We've done some testing. We've done soil samples and analyzed the soil conditions. What happens on a large development is that they'll come in, the soils engineer will come in and bore down into your project, possibly where the streets are and some building pads, trying to get an idea of the conditions and the types of soils that are utilized on that are available on the property. And then hello, and then from there we have to design the land from that analysis. So if you have a high water table in your community, the engineer will find where that seasonal high water level is, and then they'll design the roads to be so many feet above that so that they never flood. And then typically your house basically is about 18 inches above the crown of the road. So your soil samples will tell us what we can do to get good compaction in the streets and on the building pads and everything else. Traffic analysis, they will do traffic studies. Is your new development going to add more to the traffic in the neighborhood? Is our streets already overburdened with traffic? Do we need to add a turn lane or extra traffic lanes to the existing streets for the new capacity? You will have a preliminary site plan. Typically, when you apply for your zoning, you would submit that site plan in for approval, and that's a preliminary that says conceptually we're going to have 50 by 100 lots, and that's basically your site plan showing the streets and so forth. And then you're going to want to meet with your governing agencies prior to and when you do the submittal for your site permits. And then one of the things that you can task your engineer with is in helping you develop what your costs are going to be for the development. And we'll talk about that more a little bit later, but basically it amounts to the fact that your engineer should be familiar with unit pricing. You'll ask your engineer to do a quantity takeoff for you when is part of his or her work schedule. So in other words, it may show that there is going to be 500 feet of streets, 1,000 feet of 8-inch sewer, so many feet of water lines, so many water hydrants. So you would ask them to do a takeoff for you so you know the rough quantities. And if you have an experienced engineer that's used to these things, he's got a pretty good idea of what some of these items go for. So he can help you, or she can help you assimilate what your cost will be for the development. So you're going to, again, fine tune getting into the nuts and bolts of your development. You want to create a little bit of magic in it. You want to create a community that will not Bring the NIMBYs out, not in my backyard. Our communities that we did at Florida Home Partnership were outstanding first-time homebuyer communities, and we really did not have much of a NIMBY issue because we were very proactive in developing our communities and keeping our communities attractive. I'll say one note here, I just add on. I often recommend a community clubhouse. Now, I know that sounds pretty overwhelming. If you're doing a development, maybe 40, 50, 60 homes, you might want to see at a minimum of having a little playground and putting a covered pavilion there. You want to have a place where your homeowners can get together and meet, and also that homeowners could recreate a little bit. So I know it's a big expense, but it's always critical to have some kind of facility where you have a lot of residents so that they have a place to store the records, have meetings, and give this community a sense of place. I will just touch on one other thing. We also like to develop playgrounds in our work. I do, and Florida Home Partnership did. Playgrounds can be expensive. I think the last one we bought was about $50,000. There's an agency called Kaboom, Kaboom explanation point. They are a nonprofit organization, and they help you build playground. They help nonprofit organizations build playgrounds, and we've had two of their playground developments in some of our subdivisions that have been developed over the years. So we're getting into the next steps. What's next? We want to complete the full design by the engineer. We want to begin the preparation of the contract documents. In our last session, we had a 30-minute overage session where we talked about the contract documents, and we had a book, all of that information bound together in a book, and you want to begin to process that. And you can, if you did not get it in the last session, you could contact Vicki here, or maybe ask in the question and answers how you can get a copy of the contract documents. The budget is always an ever-ending battle. You want to continue to finalize that and just perfect it as you go along. You want to start with your lenders again. You know, we've been talking to them. You want to try to get some commitments in place. You want to continue establishing your timeline. And timeline is one of those things that's really, really important. For me, I usually target, you know, I know my schedule. I know when I'm going to need more building lots. At Florida Home Partnership, my goal was to build a minimum of 50 homes a year. So if I looked forward, I could see, you know, in 18 months, I'm going to be out of lots. So I could pick a date and say, this target date is when I need to get my first building permit in the new subdivision. So you've got to get your eye on that to keep your schedule and then work backwards to find the contractor schedule. And and it's your job to work with your engineer to keep your contractor on time. You want to begin your search for development contractors, and again, continue to keep up your project marketing. In the construction aspect, you're going to work with a surveyor and again with a soils engineering company. Two different scopes of work they have, and you have a scope of work for them. Perhaps you might split your surveying up, for example, into prior to zoning and then into construction surveying and staking. In the beginning, they're going to do some preliminary lot surveys and get you basic information, but then as you go into the construction development, you're going to need a surveyor to bring survey stakes out for the water line, streets, show the grades and everything else. So you need to begin to work on that contract. What's that going to look like? And then also with your soils engineering company, they have to take compaction tests as you put building pads in and you put streets in. They have to meet certain compaction requirements. So you need to work with the soils engineering company to analyze the soil, get the compaction data, and then be able to do the compaction testing to make sure that your streets are appropriately constructed and your building pads are firm. This is a big one. During this process, you also need to reach out to your utility companies. Phone company, electric company, cable, water and sewer typically is included in our infrastructure, but you need to coordinate with them. Um, we found in some developments, the phone companies don't want to put lines in anymore because it's a big expense for them up front. And they say so many people are going to cell phones, it's not cost effective for us to lay underground wiring in the subdivision. So you need to check with your phone company on that and get that up to speed. Electric for services for the homes, and street lights is another ongoing issue you need to work with. Basically, you have to put a contract together for the electric company. If you in many communities, if you do overhead wiring, which is not real attractive, there's no cost for that. But to bury the cables underground, which is done in most new communities, last subdivision I built is there was about $900 to $1,000 lot per cost for doing that, and that's for putting in the underground conduit and then the cables that go in that conduit. And perhaps you could work a deal between your site development contractor and the electric company to have the site development contractor put in that conduit so that they get everything in the right places and compacted properly, and it doesn't create an interference of work. And then cable companies, make sure they get in, because I've had more subdivisions than not. We get them all completed, and then 6 months later, here comes a cable company ripping everything up and putting cable in the ground. So you need to stay on top of that pretty aggressively. So you're working with your engineer, you're looking at the site plans, you need to talk through design choices. Your engineer may come to you and say, we spec something in a road-based material, but the contractor suggested to us using a different type of road base, and we concur, and it will save you some money. So you talk through all those things with your engineer, you finalize all of their details with the engineer. At some point, you're going to get a preliminary set of plans. The engineer is going to send you a set of blueprints and said, okay, here they are. This is pretty much it. So your job now is to review those plans amongst yourself, sit with your engineer, sit with somebody in your staff that knows what they're looking at, and really closely examine the plans. Look at every single lot. Count the lots. You're supposed to get 47 lots. Do you have 47 lots? Look at the grades, the differentials between the streets and the pads, and just look for issues in the prints, because if you're able to find them at this stage, you save a lot of effort and time, and you got a more accurate project. This is what a cover sheet of a set of blueprints looks like, construction blueprints. Basically, this is a submittal plan that was submitted to our county water district. And if you see down here in the lower right-hand corner, there's a stamp where it was approved. So that's an approved set. You want to make sure that you continue to keep that approved set, and you don't confuse that with other drawings. So, but it's really hard to see. But there's over 40 pages of drawings. So this is basically what your front set is going to look like. When it's all approved and it has the final approval of the county or the city, whoever the governing jurisdiction is, there will be a big approved stamp on there. From that point, that's your official set of documents. You want to make copies of that. You can take a whole bundle of already printed prints to your local copy shop or blueprint agency, and they can scan them and print and make you duplicate sets, but you all want to work from the same set. If you don't, it gets us into long-term problems. So we're going to develop the contract documents, what I spoke of earlier. The contract bid documents, or the contract documents, are an approved set of detailed site plans, and then your written specifications in contract forms. In the package that I supplied and we discussed last week, all of that can be packaged into one bundle. That's your bid package. The specifications talk about the general and specific product specifications, responsible entity specifications. In other words, if your county has certain requirements, they need to follow, they're being there. And then also contract governance specifications, which covers things like pay estimates and timing and warranties and all of the guidelines and rules for the program. Plus, just some of these other forms. There's a lot more bid forms, construction contract, pay estimates, change order forms. So you're going to be putting out a whole package of bid documents for bidders to bid on. So you're going to finalize your budget as close as you can. And again, it's always a moving target. You want to use the engineer's estimated quantities, unit prices, if your engineer has those available. You might work with your engineer to see does he know of another reasonably priced site development contractor that may or may not bid on this project. Your engineer could give this person or this agency, a construction company, a chance to put together a preliminary outside quote for us. This is their opinion of what the job would cost. And while that's hard for some agencies to do or some companies to do, it does, if they are going to bid, it gives them a sneak preview of what's upcoming in the plans. Allow for a contingency. You might not call it a contingency, but in your sources and uses budget, you want to have some space for something that comes over. When you're putting your costing together, you want to err on the high side. If somebody tells me something's going to cost me $10.50 a foot to put it down, I might just caution and use $10.75 or $11 in my estimate just to give me a little bit of extra cushion and room so we don't run up short at the backside. And then you want to finalize your estimate. This is the sources and uses that we went over last time. It shows the sources of funds across the top, which are going to change depending on your agency and your location and what funding is available to you. And then on the left side is the uses of the funds. And basically in this situation here, the total was $1.556 million divided by 71 lots was at $21,922 a lot. And so this is a good tool. It's very simple to make, and it helps you keep your numbers accurate. And what's missing from here is in the upper right hand, I didn't want to do that. In the upper right hand corner, I would put a date on there, and then every time you make a new one, just update it with the current date. I will draw your attention down here. About halfway down on the left-hand side is a column, is an item, an entry called site operations. Okay, you're going to build a subdivision. You're going to pay for all the infrastructure, but somehow you have to maintain all of the improvements on the site during the construction process. If you're building 15 homes a year and you decide to build a 50-lot subdivision, that's 3 years worth of inventory that you're going to have in your possession, which is a great thing, but it all has to be maintained over a period of time. You're going to have retention ponds that require monthly treatment to avoid having them get growth and funguses on them. You have to maintain the grass around the ponds. You have to maintain the common areas. You may want to pay for temporary power poles or portable toilets, but the cost to operate that site is typically something that I put into every budget that I build. Now, I allowed $62,750 for site operations during this 3-year build on the 72-unit subdivision, and so that was like around $900 a lot. So it just depends, but this is a place that you can put the costs that it's going to put the charges it's going to cost you to operate this community while you're under the construction process. Financial commitment, yeah, we're getting ready to get started, so you need to get with your lenders again. You need to finalize everything. You complete their underwriting and hopefully close on your loans before you issue a notice to commencement. That means that you've got all your financing in place. We could talk forever about loans. That's also could be a whole nother topic, another webinar, because there's so many different resources available depending on what you're building and where you're building it. So basically, you want to outline the scope of the work, again, as we talked about for the surveyor and the construction engineer. Your surveyor is going to do the construction staking. That means when the contractor is ready to go and dig in for the water or sewer line, that they'll call the surveyor a week ahead of time and say, I need stakes for Wednesday or whatever day so we can start our construction. You as a developer want to pay one time for those stakes. When they call and ask for the stakes to be put in, we pay for that. But now if the tractor operator backs up and smashes the stakes or they knock them over or whatever happens, the second time they've got to go in, that should be something that the contractor pays for, and that should be in your specifications. And then your surveyor is going to need to collect as-built data information as a project rolls along. In other words, if you're going to construct a manhole, the water department, wastewater department's going to want to know what the elevation of that invert is of the actual manhole, what it was planned and what it is actually. So you need to collect all that field data, and then also prepare a plat. We'll talk a little bit more about platting at the end, but basically these are the steps: construction staking, as-built data collection, and preparing the plat. Those would be surveyor tasks during the construction process. Soil engineer is going to do your compaction testing and soil analysis to make sure you're building your roads and your pads properly. So do you want to establish an HOA? You know, HOAs get a lot of bad rap these days, and some of it is well-deserved. But it's necessary sometimes to have an association take care of the development before, during, and after construction, so that your association, your development stays looking in good condition. The purpose of a HOA, homeowners association or property owners association, is really to protect the value of the individual properties. So if you're going to do an HOA or a property owners association, a POA, we could probably almost do a whole nother session on that, but the very minimum documents you're going to need, and they should be prepared by an attorney, is the articles of incorporation for the property owners association, bylaws, covenants, the deed restrictions. These are the things that say no goats, no chickens. You can't put cars up on blocks. Or maybe you can have goats and chickens. I'm not sure. It depends on the community. But these are the rules. And as you mature and you're developing over the years, you'll probably continue to develop some other deed restrictions that further restrict what homeowners can do. One example is I got tired of seeing couches on people's front porches. That they moved from the living room to the front porch. It's pretty cool out there, but having indoor furniture outside is really not appropriate in the community. So those types of things that you can put in to protect the values of your communities. And then you have to do an operating budget. What are the assessments? What's it going to cost? And what are the assessments? So you set up an HOA with an attorney. You develop the initial board. As a developer, you have control over the HOA. In most HOAs, you buy a home, you have one lot, you get one vote. When a developer comes in, a developer has 9 votes, or can have 9 votes for every lot they own, which give them, if they own 100% of the lots, they have 100% of the control. After the development is 90% sold out, the developer has no more special amplified votes, so they are in equal footing with the remainder of the community. So you need to develop the rules, which is the covenants, developer control. At some point, you'll turn it over to the homeowners association once you're pretty well sold out. You set a budget, record HOA documents after the plat has been recorded. And one big thing here is to record your HOA docs before your first lot closing. If you're building a subdivision with 50 lots, and on January 1st, you sell lot 1 to Susie, and January 2nd, you sell lot 2 to Fred, and then on January 3rd, you record your covenants, your deed restrictions. Well, guess what? Susie and Fred just bought lots that were not, they did not have deed restrictions on them. So if you want to be effective, you have to record the documents before you sell any other lots. Can that be corrected? It can be corrected, but it's a very difficult process once you've sold on lots. So you're going to go out to bid. You've sent your contract documents out. You've had a pre-bid meeting. Basically, you want to allow the bidders 3 to 4 weeks to put their numbers together. You'll hold a formal bid opening. You may hold a formal bid opening. Well, let me rephrase that. You will hold a formal bid opening. It's either in public or in private, depending on what the circumstances are, and depending on your choice. You can make that either way. You and your engineer review the bids, negotiate bids. You want to make sure there was no mistakes. Is this guy so much cheaper because he forgot to, do another street, or you just have to compare apples to apples. And then at some point you'll be ready to uh, advertise the bid, or to award the bid. So in the bidding, I like to target 8 to 12 bidders. You get a wide cross section that way. Absolutely conduct a pre-bid meeting, mandatory pre-bid meeting. Everybody must come to the meeting. Everybody talks about everything. If there's any changes, everybody was at that pre-bid notice meeting, gets notified, and it keeps everybody all on the same page. We do require formal sealed bids, and as I said, they can be opened in public or in private. So once you get your bids in, you'll review them with the engineer. You'll compare your bid items, and you may want to negotiate with the contractors. We have that language in our documents that say we'll take sealed bids, and then we may choose to negotiate with a bidder if they want to bring their price down or offer some alternatives to make it basically more affordable for us. So, and then basically you'll arrive at, this is our successful bidder. You'll notify all of the contractors if you have a bidder in place, and then start to work on that details with that individual contractor that's the apparent high bidder or low bidder. So one of the things that I look at when I'm selecting a contractor is how soon can they start? When can they have a crew on the site? What's their capacity? And when do they tell me they're going to be completed? So those are factors that I look at as the scheduling. So you'll finalize the details with the contractor. You'll meet with the successful bidder. And let me just take a moment to say that if you're negotiating a large contract like this, you need to be very transparent. Many of us will be using government dollars of some sort or another to construct this project, or they may be lender dollars. And so everything that you do is going to be in scrutiny. So if you are negotiating, don't find yourself in a room by yourself with a contractor, because it's not appropriate, and it could put the whole process in a dull light. You want to be very open and transparent with all of the negotiations. Have your engineer there, yourself, and maybe 1 or 2 people from your finance, maybe someone from your finance team, one of your staff members. So you'll firm up a proposed schedule. You will issue an award letter to the contractor. Dear contractor, you are the apparent low bidder, and we intend to work with you. Then we will actually draw up or execute the contract. And then before they start, once everything is all in place, we have all the pieces we need. At some point, we issue a NTP, or notice to proceed. A very simple document that says, dear contractor, you are now authorized to proceed. According to the contract, you have 30 days to which start your work. And at the end of this 30 days, you have X number of days to complete your work. Then you hold a pre-construction meeting with, again, maybe your utilities, the engineer, the soils people, the surveyor, everybody involved in this process. You talk about all of the things that need to be talked about, how you want to get paid, when you want to get paid. All of those things are covered at the pre-construction meeting. And if possible, hold them on the site. If you have a subdivision that has been completed recently, if there's any place there to hold it, or you want to hold it on the site, or maybe in a conference room somewhere. But again, it's always important to get everyone included. So it's time to get ready to start construction. You have to supervise the site development. And that is a chore that's often left up to the engineer. They put money in their budget for site supervision. when I was with Florida Home Partnership, I love to be out in the field. If you see that little guy out there in the tractor, that's not me, but that would be me standing close to watch what's going on, because it's really fun and exciting for me personally to be out in the field and see all of the activity. But chances are you will have an engineer, an experienced engineer, and their staff to do site inspection for you. And in doing so, you and your team may be able to assist them. So here are 10 tips that I like to use for managing the construction. Number one, we already said, hold a pre-construction meeting. Pay your engineer to do the construction monitoring and inspection. Number three, do not let your site contractor get upside down on pay requests. So what that means, if your project costs $500,000 to build, you're going to be giving them payment requests on a monthly basis, depending on what work they have completed. And it's really, really, really critical that you don't pay for something that isn't completed. Otherwise, it may cost more to get the job completed than what you have left in the budget. And it's really difficult for you to force a contractor to finish a job where there's not enough money in it to finish it. So it's your duty and your job and your engineer's duty and job to make sure that the contractor does not get too far ahead of you in pay estimates. Visit your site often, probably every day, so you know what's going on. You want to be in good relationship with the inspectors, because knowing them can work to your advantage, and especially if you have any issues to work through with the contractor. And then again, monitor the contractor's time closely. Pay your contractors promptly. I like to pay them in 2 weeks if that's possible. Know your contract documents very well, frontwards and backwards, so that all of a sudden you don't get halfway through the project and say, you know what, we were supposed to do this and now we missed it. So it's really on you to know what you're getting your money's worth. Be fair with change orders. And then finally, there will come a time where you're going to do a final walkthrough, and this is going to be part of the acceptance. You've taken this big piece of land, you've cut it up into lots, you've put in water, street, sidewalk, sewer, all the infrastructure. And now, if your county or city is going to maintain this, they're going to do an acceptance of the development. And basically, they will send out inspectors from stormwater, water and sewer, public works, landscaping, maybe zoning, to make sure that all the work meets their satisfaction. Probably a punch list will be issued to the contractor. These are all of the tasks that you need to finish up. And but be very, very thorough in your inspection walk. That's the way you get things fixed before the project is accepted. And learn from your mistakes so you can do better next time. Okay, so now we have this big piece of land. We've put in all the infrastructure. As it shows on this picture here, you have what was once a large lot. In this particular subdivision, it's now 166 lots. So you're going to have to come up with a name for the development, street names, submit your plat for approval, and then the plat recording. So basically, this document here is a sample of a completed plat. If you can look on the left-hand side in the center, you can see it's been accepted and recorded by the probably the county clerk. And so this is a final document. This shows what the original parcel was, and basically shows all the particulars, the corners, the width of the lot, the length of the lot, the dimensions of the street. This is the final, kind of like as-built, that gets recorded, that is the final proof that your subdivision is actually a platted subdivision. When this plat gets recorded, accepted by your county, and recorded in the public record, now instead of one big lot, you own 24 separate lots. And then that street is no longer your property. That street is now the property of the governing entity. So you're getting done with your site. It's looking something like this. You got some grass in. You may or may not have pavement in, or pavement is scheduled in the next couple of days. You're getting really close. The water's in, the sewer's in, the testing's done, everything's been lamped, it works properly, and you're like, oh man, I want to get done. I can see it, I can taste it, I want to get my building permits. So this is, for me, one of the frustrating processes. It's the last finishing details in a development, which you have to account for some time for that. Um, when you're done, you want to make sure that your lots should be ready to build on as you had anticipated them. So you're at this point yet. We're looking at improvements that are accepted and operated by the municipal government. So they will do a final inspection on the property. They'll approve the plat, and when the improvements are accepted and the plat is recorded in the public record, then typically it goes from there to the streets and addresses people for them to issue street numbers for the homes. And then once that's done, you can apply for a building permit. However, in some situations, you don't have time to wait for that, or you choose not to wait for that, so you may ask for model home permits. When you build with a model home permit, you're typically building in the middle of a field. You don't have your utilities, water, sewer, electric in place yet, so you're going to be building with generators. It's hard to access the site sometimes, but some municipalities, depending on the size of your development, will let you have 2, 3, 4. They're called model home permits. And if you think of a large nationwide home builder, they come in and develop a site, and then they build their homes, their model homes to sell from while they're finishing the development. This is the same process here. However, by working with your government, they may allow you to use your model home permits to start to build a spec home with. So please keep that, or several spec homes, keep that in mind. And that's always a possibility, is to ask for model home permits. So managing the construction. Once the construction work has been completed, the responsible government agency must accept the project. I guess they don't have to, but the ideal goal is to get them to accept the project. That's a long process in a bureaucratic system. It can take up to 30 days. And you work with your engineer to plan for this time. And basically, they will then, at some point, they will accept all the improvements, record the plat, and then you should be ready to start your residential construction. So that's a lot put into 50 minutes here, but I'd be glad to answer any questions for anyone that may have any questions. And thank you.
You're muted, Vicky.
I know, it just told me I was muted, so that somebody has to do that. You're muted. Um, so if you've got any questions, just throw them in the chat. So we'll be able to ask Earl those, or if you would like to unmute, you could do that as well, and ask Earl any of the questions that you've thought of around subdivision development. We've had a great 3 webinars around Earl's vast wealth of knowledge around subdivisions. Questions, Earl, you've answered all the questions.
Well, that's great. I've done my job.
I think somebody did ask if the kaboom was nationwide, or is that just limited to states?
No, Kaboom is a nationwide nonprofit organization, and they operate everywhere in the continental United States that I'm aware of. They'll come to your site, and you can meet with them, and you can plan a playground. Typically, they come up with they get sponsors, maybe a sponsor like Home Depot or some company like that. They may come up with 75% of the work of the dollars that you need to build a playground. They have their own suppliers that bring the product out, and then typically you build in a community build on the site. There's a lot of work to the prep for that, but it is a way to get a nice playground for your community at a minimal cost for your organization.
Okay, and Jessica does have a question about having resources for where to get government funding to develop properties.
Okay.
Or subdivisions. So
I'm not sure. The question is,
do we have resources for where they could get government funding to develop?
Well, this is the time, typically before this time, you have been if you're a nonprofit agency and you're working in housing, you have established a relationship with maybe your county or state or city, where with some jurisdiction, and every state has different programs, different guidelines. Some provide money for development, some don't. Um, there are CDBG funds. If you're in an entitlement community, that can get direct CDBG funds or home funds. Your state may have a housing fund. There's the Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta, which is a tiresome, not tiresome, it's a long process you have to go through, and you don't know whether you're going to get funded until the awards are all done. So that's a process. If you're building self-help housing, you could talk to the housing assistants about shop funds. HAC also has, they have development loans under certain situations. So there's a wide variety of sources that you can get them from. And you may also want to go to your community bank and maybe get a line of credit based on the equity in the property. So there's a lot of alternatives. One thing I would suggest, sometimes if you go to a community bank and you say, you know what, our development's 500,000, we've got most of it, we need $150,000 to make the deal work. Your bank is likely going to ask you to have everybody else subordinate behind them so that they're in a favorable position. Should there be a fallout, they would be first to collect their money, and many government funding agencies are willing to subordinate. So that's just another factor to keep into mind. So there are sources out there, and hopefully you'll just develop those over your time as working in housing.
Great suggestions. And I just wanted to make a side note that federal home loan banks, just Google that or look that up as well on the websites, because they're across the United States. So what served Earl maybe in the Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta, we also fell under the Federal Home Loan Bank of Dallas. So
Right.
there are, I think, 4 or 5 different Federal Home Loan Banks. So it's in your best interest just to go and do a little bit of research with those entities as well. So Michael has asked, can you build a mixed income development, or does that complicate the funding too much?
Yes and no. It can. It depends on the jurisdiction. It depends on the funding source that you're using. Um, what we asked for when we developed was, 80% of our homes are going to go to people under 80% of median income. We wanted to do some homes up to 120% because that's where the market was at that time. Some lenders, some municipalities, if you're using home funds, um, there, sometimes they say if $1 of home funds is put into a project, then the whole project has to benefit families under 80%. And there's a lot of different interpretations on that. So I personally like the idea of diversity. I think if you have structured different income levels in your community, that's healthy for the community, because if you have a community with large community with everybody under 80%, or you have some people with higher incomes, it just helps create a more diverse and stronger community if you're able to do it. And it just takes planning. You really have to work with your lenders up front to see that if this is a possibility.
Okay, so next question is, Patricia's asked, what is the best option when you know that you want to put together a development? How do you put together your team?
Well, it depends on what you call your team. You know, you need to have somebody on your team that has some kind of clue or some information about development. That would be most helpful. If not, you need an engineer that is willing to hold your hand. And it's just like anything else. When it's time to do the work, you go out and hunt these people down. Looking for engineers, sometimes you can go to neighboring subdivisions that you drive through, and you'll see the sign for the engineer that developed that. You can go to your planning officials or the zoning officials and say, hey, we're building affordable housing subdivision. Can you recommend an engineer to work with? Once you get an engineer on your team, then they can generally help you find the others, like soil companies, soil testing companies, surveyors, and they can even help you recruit your your site development contractor. But typically it starts with getting a real good engineer in, and you just have to network a little bit and find out who's been successful. And then if your jurisdiction has an affordable housing department, you might ask them, have you worked with any other engineers that have done, who's done affordable housing in this community, so they can, they understand the community incentives and they understand the local zoning rules. So, and then if you want to hire, that's a whole nother issue. But typically it's best to work with consultants.
Some great tips there. So Dan has also put in the chat a link that would lead you to be able to research the Federal Home Loan Bank organizations on your own as well. And then just wanted to share with you all that the recording of today's webinar and other materials will be posted later this week. So just watch your email and watch the HACC website for any of the updates. So let's
Let
see.
me
Wait,
make just one additional comment if I can. In the funding, if you are in a development that is building self-help housing, if it's going to be for that, and I know some people are and some people aren't, but U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, has a program called the Section 523 loan. It's different than the 523 grant. It's a loan program with a low interest rate, and it is direct lending from the federal government to you. The applications are not that overwhelmingly difficult. And I think in the last development, I think we got like a little bit over $2 million. It was a very large development, but we got a loan from them. Payments have to be made, but it was at that time at like 1% or 1.5% interest rate. So that's another program as well. If you're building self-help in rural America, you could apply for that as well.
great option. Michael does have one last question here, and he's asking, in rural places, there's often not many options for engineers and contractors. How does that affect the process?
It is. I mean, now it becomes expensive. Okay. In addition to paying, if they're maybe in the next town, 25, 30 miles away, it's just a cost of doing business. I mean, basically, you've got to find a site development contractor somewhere, and you got to find an engineer. So it is a greater challenge in rural areas. And again, it just starts with networking and finding the resources from the community of people that work there. Are there other subdivisions in your neighborhood or area where you're building? What engineers has done those jobs, and kind of work backwards from that point.
Great. Jessica asked what the loan was called. I think, was that the 523 loan?
It's called a USDA Section 523 Site Development Loan.
So you're looking for the site development loan under USDA 523.
Right. And they do have one that's a little different than that. It's not the 523, but it's really close. And I don't really remember the difference, but the best thing to do is contact the local rural development office and ask for their contact for the state director for housing for rural development, and they can probably put you in touch with that. I will say one additional thing on that 523 site development loan, that it's really underutilized by a lot of practitioners. USDA has worked hard to get that money out on the street every year, and they haven't always been successful in deploying all of their dollars. So it's competitive, but they want to work with you. That's their job, is to help you develop homes in the rural areas. So definitely check it out.
One more question, or I'll keep saying one more question. Anyway, Patricia does have a question. She says, so if she approaches her city and that she would like to, and tell them that she would like to build, what is the best way to approach a city building development to have them work with her? So how does she get the city building development to work with her in her subdivision?
Well, just a couple comments. It depends on the size of the community you're working with. If it's a really, really, really small rural community, they may not have any resources. Many jurisdictions have an affordable housing office, or whether it's at the county or the city level, but their job is to provide funding and mechanisms for building affordable housing. So you really need to get familiar with those folks. You could talk to city council members or county commission members and get some feedback from them if you know any of them personally. But if you have an affordable housing division, you might start there. If you don't have one, then it becomes a little bit more difficult. And normally, it's a question that there's really not a lot of answer to. If you can't get anywhere with your city or county, you may want to go up to your state level and work with them. Sometimes states have additional federal funds that they can pass through to a county or a city if they're willing to participate in the process.
Right. I think it's like Earl said, it's definitely good to get those people involved because you're going to need their support as you continue to build the subdivision. So yeah.
If you're building affordable housing, if that's what your if you are a nonprofit and you specialize in that, before you start thinking about building a subdivision, you should have those partners in mind. You should be talking to them. Your board members should be talking to some of these officials. So it shouldn't be a big surprise unless you're a brand new agency and then just starting out. But if you've been around a while, you want to have a reputation of developing good work, and a lot of these funds come to the communities and they have to be used in housing. Otherwise, they get sent back to the government, and not many governments want to see those funds go back.
Okay. Well, would like to thank everyone once again for joining us today in the other two webinar series with Earl. He's given us a lot of knowledge to think about and continue down the path of building affordable homes. We're going to have to end the session today because we're right on time with that. So remember to watch your emails for the evaluations and also follow up on the HAC website for these recorded webinars, and materials will be there for you as well. Thank you, Earl. Thanks,
Okay,
everybody.
thank you.